Ayurveda says that we should not suppress natural urges. So what does this mean? Well, the body has many voluntary and involuntary activities going on in it. Here we have a picture of a baby yawning, and yawning is not totally under the baby's control. And these may also include blinking or pooping or peeing. These activities are happening all the time, and they're essential to our health. And we don't have total control over them, but we do have some control over them. We can suppress them at times or forcibly express them. And Ayurveda says that this can cause problems, that it's actually one of the origins of disease. There are 14 natural urges, and we'll go through them and what happens when you chronically suppress or forcefully express them. This is something that we already know and we've heard about in several different areas. Like if you try too hard to poop and you're pushing it out, you could cause a hemorrhoid. And if you suppress the urge to poop, then you'll hold in the feces in your body, and that's going to create ama. It's going to maybe create distension of the bowels as well. So we already know that we shouldn't suppress or forcibly express these things. But what kinds of problems will happen specifically in different areas is helpful because you may be having some of these symptoms and not realizing that it's coming from suppression or expression of a natural urge. Now, if you do this once, it's not going to cause a huge problem. But if this is we're talking about chronically doing these things. Generally, suppressing natural urges aggravates vata and causes distension. Can cause distension, like distension of the bladder. If you refuse to pee, it can cause your bladder to become stretched. And it also causes hyperactivity. If you ever seen a kid do the pee-pee dance, then you'll know that you'll know what I mean here. That it kind of excites or stimulates the nervous system. So let's go through the 14 main urges or vegas that Ayurveda talks about in regard to disorders of suppression or forcible expression. Well, if you suppress the urge to fart, it can cause distension of the bowels. It can cause pain in your bowels. Probably most people have experienced that. And Ayurveda says it can cause an abdominal tumor. And by that, it doesn't mean cancer. It means like a mass building up somewhere in your gut. And that's true. If you suppress the urge to fart, then your peristalsis won't work that well, and the feces will gather and sort of get stuck in different areas in your body. It kind of vexes or confuses your bowels, so peristalsis doesn't work. So that leads to masses forming of poop in your gut. It causes upward movement of vata, which means that if you suppress the urge to fart too much, actually it could come out as a burp, and air will start moving upward instead of going downward. It can cause pain in the abdomen. Oh, we talked about that. And also some debility. There's a buildup of ama. In general, when you're suppressing elimination of waste products, you're going to have a buildup of ama, and that's going to eventually cause debility, tiredness, exhaustion, etc. Now, Ayurveda also gives some other surprising side effects here, that if you generally retain these feces, urine, or farting, that you could have a loss of vision. And that sounds really surprising until you consider the pathogenesis there. Is if you have a high ama, it's going to aggravate the liver. And, I've experienced this many times, that when I have high ama, my eyesight is more blurry. And decreased digestive power, your bowels get confused. They don't work well. There's ama building up in there. They can get inflammation and irritation. And also diseases of the heart. Your heart is smooth muscle tissue, and so it's subject to colic. And when you have lots of ama, the nervous system gets irritated, and smooth muscle tissue doesn't behave so smoothly anymore. It it starts to become more erratic, and that can create conditions of colic anywhere: headaches, heart palpitations, colic in the gut, menstrual cramping during the period. So yeah, it seems surprising on the surface, but when you look into it, actually makes a lot of sense. Suppressing of burping. It can cause herniation of the valves in the stomach. The word should say valves there. And it can cause loss of appetite, obstruction of the heart and lung function, coughing and hiccuping, etc. Suppressing of a bowel movement. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mentioned just before heart palpitations from suppressing the bowels, and I actually had that. And in this case here, in Bangladesh, I got a parasite infection, and it was causing really terrible diarrhea, and I just got tired of going to the bathroom. I decided I was going to hold it in. This was before I studied Ayurveda, and so I suppressed it. And not only did that make the sickness and inflammation worse, I actually experienced those heart palpitations from the buildup of ama. And also, it made it much harder to establish a regular elimination schedule afterwards. My bowels were really off for a long time because of that. So we shouldn't suppress bowel movements. Not just suppression of farting, but suppression of bowel movements. All of the disorders that are caused by suppressing farting can be caused by suppressing feces as well. And including twisting pains or cramps in the calf muscle. That's a real interesting one that I used to have too. Before I found out I was allergic to gluten, and I would have lots of bowel issues all the time, especially after I got those parasites. And suppression of that would cause buildup of ama, and I always noticed that my calf muscles were cramping, and that was very interesting. I actually used to walk on the balls of my feet and lift my ankles because putting my ankles down to the ground would hurt that muscle. And my dad used to tell me when I was a kid, put your heel in the ground, son, and that was actually hard for me to do. It also will cause a runny nose if you suppress bowel movements. Again, due to the buildup of ama in the tissues, it'll irritate the mucous membranes. Oh, let me unpack that cramping issue a little more. Why cramping in the calf muscle? Because the ama has to be eliminated from your bloodstream, and your kidneys do a fair amount of that by making you pee often. And by peeing often, you get an electrolyte imbalance, and now that causes cramping in your muscles. And so, we can look and see how that is all connected. Suppressing of a bowel movement can cause headache. I mentioned that with colic just a few minutes ago. And now this last one's very interesting, feces coming out of the mouth. Now that's a serious case. If your intestines are impacted, this actually will happen. That eventually your body will do whatever it can to get the stuff that's out of your bowel. So if there's a blockage, it'll come out the other way. And that's kind of gross to think about. Sorry, folks. Suppression of urination. In addition to all of the things caused by suppressing farting or feces, you can get distension of the bladder, stones, kidney stones or bladder stones, and pain in that area of the body. And you can pause on any of these slides to look it up exactly and get more info about it. I'm just making the biggest points. Suppression of sneezing. My dad used to hold his nose when he sneezed and close his mouth because he had spring allergies, and he'd be sneezing so often that it would irritate his throat, and he just didn't want to irritate the throat anymore. So he would hold his nose when he sneezed and close his mouth. And you can imagine all this pressure in the lungs when his whole chest tightened down to expel the air. Well, the pressure was so great that it would pop his eardrums. He'd get that sound of popping his ears. So suppression of sneezing can cause headache and debility of the sense organs, probably his hearing, and also stiffness of the neck. And Ayurveda says facial paralysis as well. Suppressing of thirst. I have faint thirst, and I do notice some of these conditions if I don't drink enough. And dehydration, even a small amount of dehydration really affects your energy levels and your thinking skills, everything. So be really careful about that. But I've noticed several of these. I've never noticed deafness come from faint thirst, but Ayurveda does say that dryness and high vata causes problems in the ears and ringing in the ears. So that may be what they're referring to there. But weight loss and debility, debility. When you're dehydrated, you feel debility, and if you're dehydrated, you also have more trouble digesting your food, because you need to be well hydrated to produce the 2/3 of a liter necessary to digest a meal of enzymes and things. So if you are dehydrated, then your digestion won't work that well, and you will have some weight loss. And again, I've noticed this in my own body. Suppression of hunger is a big problem for anorexics. They suppress their hunger, and then they lose touch with their hunger signals. And I get clients all the time who tell me that it's hard for them to relearn how to eat naturally. They're so used to overthinking about food that they don't even recognize their hunger signals anymore. And this is a really big issue with anorexics. Suppression of sleep. Oh, well, who hasn't experienced that? Not everyone tries to suppress their sleep, but if you don't get a good night's sleep, all of these conditions you are going to experience them. Delusion, heaviness of the head and eyes, yawning, lassitude, giddiness, etc. Suppression of cough is a funny thing, because suppression of cough actually increases the urge to cough. For whatever reason, when I get a cough, it's like always one of those. I was always one of those kids that just like when I got a cough, I would just be coughing all the time. And after a day or so of that, you just get exhausted coughing. And I can remember so often just trying to stop coughing, like if only I could stop coughing. And the problem with that is, as soon as you're trying to relax and suppress that urge to cough, the vagus nerve is this funny nerve in the body where when you're relaxed, it stimulates the vagus nerve. And it's the vagus nerve that's responsible for coughing. So as soon as you try to relax and stop the cough, it makes you want to cough more. That's why people cough a lot when they lie down at night. Coughing, Ayurveda says, can cause these other issues. Suppression of cough can cause these other issues as well. Suppression of heavy breathing after exertion, Ayurveda says, can cause masses in the gut. Cardiac issues and delusion. I've never experienced that. In fact, it's very hard to suppress heavy breathing. But if you've done a lot of yoga and breath work, that may be something that a skill that you've cultivated. Suppression of yawning, Ayurveda says, will cause the same symptoms as suppression of sneezing. And the one, it's hard for me to make sense of some of these or why it might happen, but stiffness of the neck, that may be one that I've noticed. Suppression of tears. Everyone says, don't suppress your tears, don't suppress your crying. Ayurveda says it will form these conditions. Stiffness of the neck, etc. Runny nose. Again, not something I've experienced here, but I do know that there's a lot of folk wisdom around, either suppressing your tears at some point or not suppressing them at others. All right, here's another one I used to do. Suppression of vomiting. I remember suppressing the urge to vomit as a kid. And I actually got really good at this skill. So I just didn't like vomiting. But vomiting is like so good for you, right? I mean, you shouldn't force yourself to do it. That's bulimia. Or if you're regularly doing that. But if you feel like you need to vomit, generally that's a good thing. You want to get, because your body stimulates that urge if there's something bad in your gut. Now, in my late 20s, here's how suppressing vomiting really hurt me. In my late 20s, I was given a poisonous mushroom by a famous mycologist. And so I just totally trusted this person because they were a famous mycologist. But I think because they were famous at identifying mushrooms, this person got a little too cocky and overconfident and gave us all a poisonous mushroom. And everybody else in the group of people that ate this poisonous mushroom threw it up spontaneously except for me. And so by the time everyone found out that that's what the problem was, I had already digested this mushroom. Thank goodness I didn't die, but I had a rash on my foot for 2 years, and my liver has been weak ever since. So avoid, and I have had a lot of sciatica from it too. I had sciatica for 2 years from that poisonous mushroom. So, don't eat poisonous mushrooms and don't suppress the urge to vomit. So look at this. Erysipelas is a skin rash that Ayurveda says is caused by suppression of vomiting. And that's what happened. I got that rash on my foot, right? The poison attacked my liver because I didn't vomit it out. And skin rashes are associated with liver disorders. So all of these, I can tell you, all of these are outcomes of weak liver in Ayurveda. And even a fever, right? If you have an infection in your gut and your body's trying to eliminate it, and you don't vomit, you may get a fever. Suppression of seminal discharge. The urge to ejaculate. This is a spiritual practice in some forms of spirituality, which can be really harmful and cause pain in the penis, distension. So, this doesn't mean that you should, go out and not suppress your sexuality. This is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about suppressing your ejaculation at the moment of orgasm. I think every tradition in the world, knows that we need to have some temperance around our sexuality, but But we should not suppress discharge of semen when having an orgasm. And here's some other conditions that Ayurveda lists for this. All right.